Thanks for joining me in making this Herringbone Crystal Rivoli Bezel. Go ahead and take a look at the list of materials below, and once you have those gathered up, let's go ahead and start our bezel. The first thing that I'm going to create is a herringbone bezel for my 18 millimeter Rivoli. I'm going to begin by picking up one seed bead, one of my 11 seed beads, and I'm going to use this as a stop bead. So I'm going to take this thread through the bead most of the way and just leave a small tail of a couple inches. I'm going to take my thread and my needle back through that same bead and give it a little tug so that that thread just loops around the outside of the bead. And then that will hold that bead in place on the string on my thread here, so that I can continue to work without it falling off. Pick up one more of your seed beads and again go back through that initial bead through our stop bead here. And what this will do is allow the new bead to sit right next to the first bead here. So I should have the two beads sitting right next to each other and the holes aligned in the same direction. Pick up two more beads, and I'm going to go down through the right bead. So I'm taking my needle and thread towards me through that bead. The two beads that I just added will be sitting directly on top of my two previous beads, facing the exact same direction. So if I look at this head on here from the top, I have the two holes facing upward in those beads. My thread is coming out of the second seed bead that I picked up, the one sitting right next to my stop bead. I'm going to pick up one of my seed beads, and I'm going to pass through that seed bead all the way at the end on the right side here. Pass through and give the project a little tug. And as we pull that thread through, it's going to allow that new seed bead that I added to sit on the outside of the four beads that I have here in my herringbone. I'm going to flip this to the right. I'm going to flip it here so that I'm now working again on the right side. And as I work this, I'll flip back and forth so that I'm always working on the right side here. If you prefer to work on the left side, you can do the same, or you can work on both sides. Again, what I'm going to do here is just pick up two seed beads, and I'm going to go down through that bead on the right, that last bead there on the right. Give it a little tug and situate those beads in the herringbone so that they're sitting directly on top of the beads beneath them, with the little holes, with their holes sticking straight up, so you should be able to see down through those holes. Pick up one more seed bead and go through that seed bead at the end on the right, and we're going from the bottom out through the top or away from us. And as we pull that, we'll add that new bead that we just picked up so that it is sitting off to the side. It's very difficult to see with the first bead that we added on the outside of the herringbone that's where it's sitting, because we don't have much of the herringbone done yet. But once you start making the herringbone longer, you'll see that those little beads that we add will start to sit off the side, sort of catty-corner from each other, and be like little arms sitting off on the side. I'm going to do another little bit of herringbone here, so I'm going to pick up another two beads, go down through that bead on the right, and remember I just flipped this, so I'm working on the right again. Pick up one more bead and go through that last bead on the right, taking the needle and thread away from me. And once I do that and I pull that through, it'll add that second seed bead embellishment here on the edge to the herringbone. And I'm going to keep going like this until I have 16 seed beads on one side and 15 on the other. So I'm talking about these little arms here, that embellishment that I'm adding to the herringbone. I'm going to have 16 of these on one side and 15 on the other side. So go ahead and continue until you get to that point, and then we're going to turn this into a loop to make a bezel. Once we have a length of herringbone that has 16 of these little embellishments on one side and 15 of the embellishments on the other, we're in a good position here to now attach the ends together. So I like to hold this so that I have the tail thread here coming out of the bottom, and the top here, the top right is where the thread, my working thread is. I'm going to pick this up and just kind of wrap it around my finger. Now before I do that, I'm just going to show you here, these are the beads that we're actually going to be using to connect the ends. The right and left bead here at the end of the herringbone on this side, and the two beads, the right and left beads here on the end of the other side. So we're just taking these 4 beads and we're going to do essentially what kind of is like a little right angle weave pattern, just up through one, down through the other, and connect them. So now I'm going to pick up this length of herringbone and hold it with my fingers. This is my tail thread here, so I'm just going to hold this out of the way. I have that working thread here that's attached to my needle, and that's coming out of the last bead on the right side of my herringbone. And I'm going to connect it to the very first bead that's on the right side of my herringbone on the opposite side here. And I'm just going to pass through that bead. I'm going to go up through the bead to the left of it, which is my stop bead. And continue to bridge that gap and go through the left bead on the other end of my herringbone here. So once I pull that tight, I should have the ends here connected. Now I want to add one more of my little embellishments here in this gap. So to do that, I'm going to go down through the first and last bead here on the right, the 2 beads that I connected when I connected my ends together, and go up through the bead on the left here. The bead sitting directly to the left of the bead that my thread is now coming out of. I'm going to add that little embellishment bead here. So I'm going to pick up one of my seed beads, one of those 11-ohs. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip over and kind of go around this seed bead here that's sitting directly on top of the bead that I'm coming out of. So I'm going to kind of skip around it, and what I mean is I'm just going to go on the outside of it, and I'm going to go down through that bead from the top to the bottom. So I'm going to go take my thread and my needle through that bead so it's coming out towards me. And what that will do is allow that seed bead that I just picked up to sit right between those 2 seed beads in the herringbone pattern. So now at this point, I should have a nice little herringbone bezel from the side. It looks a bit like a crown. And if we put our Rivoli in here, you can tell here that it's just about the right size. It shouldn't be too tight. If it's a little bit loose, that's okay. If it's too tight and the Rivoli does not fit in there, then you may need to do another section of herringbone, make it a little bit longer, but it should fit perfectly if you're using Tohos with that count of 16 and 15 embellishment on the side. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to move on to making this into a bezel that cinches and works to hold that Rivoli. Once you have the herringbone bezel complete, at least this first little part of it here, where we've cinched it together, we've stitched it together, and so now we have a complete circle. It looks a little bit like a crown, and you can see on either side of the bezel, either side of the herringbone that's going down the center here, we have our little embellishments to the side. So you're going to have those little embellished beads, embellishment beads here, offset from one another as we travel around this bezel. I'm going to take the yarn that I'm a knitter, so I frequently, yarn comes out of my mouth instead of thread. I'm going to take this thread that I'm using, and I want to make sure that I'm grabbing the thread that's attached to my needle. I have a few different little pieces of straggler thread here, some of these little extra pieces that I haven't cut off yet. So just take a second here and make sure that you're grabbing the right thread. And what we're going to do here is we want to get our thread in position so that we can travel through one of the little beads on the side here that was that embellishment bead. So I'm going to travel forward here in my design. I'm traveling through one of my seed beads in the center that was part of that herringbone. And I'm just going to get myself in position so that I can easily then pass through one of those embellishing beads on the side. So once you're coming out through one of those side beads, and we're just going to keep referring to those as those embellishments, we're going to pick up one seed bead, one of our 2mm crystals, another seed bead, and so we've got that set of 3 beads on our needle. You can go ahead and let that fall right off your needle. And now coming out of one embellishment bead, we're going to skip the next bead and we're going to pass through the next embellishment bead. And as we pull, we'll push that, all those beads that we're just adding, including that little blue crystal, and we're going to push that towards the center or towards the inside of our ring here. And we're going to continue again, picking up a seed bead, a bicone and a seed bead, skipping one embellishment, and passing through the next. And we want to push that crystal to the center here, so we don't want it to be squishing that embellishment. The bead that we skipped in the embellishment, we want that to be on the outside, and we want our bicone to be facing towards the inside of, towards that inside empty circle that's created by our little crown here. And we're going to continue, and we're going to continue here doing the same thing until we get close to the end and where we have no more room to go because we're close back to the beginning of where we started. So I'm going to keep going on here, and then I will show you how to handle and how to connect here when we get all the way back to the beginning where we started. I have one more crystal to add. I have my crystal with that 11-0 seed bead on either side. And just like I've been doing, I'm going to skip over one of these little embellishments on the very outside and go through the next one. So the next one that I go through will be the first one where I started this process. And you'll see that once I go through that bead, directly coming out of that bead is the first set of beads that I picked up in this step. Make sure everything is sitting where I want it, and make sure that that crystal gets pushed to the inside there, and my little embellishment bead is out on the outside. I've gone through the embellishment bead where I was supposed to, and now I'm going to continue here. I'm going to go through that first set of seed bead, crystal seed bead that I picked up when I began this step. Pull my thread through, and I'll just take a quick look at this and make sure that everything looks the way that I want it to, that all of my crystals have been pushed to the inside, and that all of the little embellishments that are actually sitting right outside of the seed bead, or the seed bead embellishments are sitting right outside and next to those crystals. We've now completed the top part of our bezel, and we're ready to move on to the back part. The first thing that we're going to do is take our 18mm Rivoli, and we're going to drop our 18mm Rivoli into the bezel. So we want the top side of our bezel, or the top side of our crystal with all the lovely color, to be on the same side with the crystals. And the back here, we will work on cinching this up and overlapping this seed bead herringbone onto the back here to give it a nice tight back so it's not going to let the crystal fall out. Grab onto that thread that you have attached to your needle, and we're going to work our way back through the herringbone and through the seed beads until we get to the embellishment beads here on the opposite side from where we did the front section with the crystals. So you're just following your thread path here. Until you have your thread and your needle coming out through the embellishing seed beads on the other side. So what we're going to do now, holding our crystal in the bezel, what we're going to do is pick up one of our seed beads. We're going to go through the next two embellishment seed beads. So you can see I'm going through the next two. Pick up another seed bead. And again here I'm going to go through the next two of those embellished seed beads. And I'm going to continue like this all the way around. It's going to start pulling in the edges around the back of my crystal. I have one seed bead here to pick up, and I'm going through the next two. And give that a pull. And as you work on it, just pull any of these stray little threads that you need to burn down later. Just pull them out of your way. And you can see if I give it a nice little tight tug, it's going to start pulling those seed beads in over the back of your crystal to create a nice formed little backing there. So I'm going to continue until I get back to the front where I started, or back to the beginning here where I started, and then we can move on to doing some more embellishment and making this a little bit more sparkly. We now want to begin adding embellishment and kind of fluffing this guy up so that it makes more of a statement than just a very well bezeled piece. We want it to have a little bit more personality than that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to bring my needle and thread to the rows of herringbone where I originally was creating that herringbone. So I have here, if you look at the back, I have my inside row. This is where I was cinching everything in. And then I have two rows of herringbone after that. And this herringbone row here, which is closest to my little embellishments here that aren't being used, this top row of herringbone, this is where I'm going to start adding my embellishments. I want to have my needle and thread coming out of one of those beads in that herringbone. And then I'm simply going to start by adding some embellishments and by adding some fringe. I have an assortment of beads here, and I'm going to start with these little round beads. These are little 3mm rounds. So I've picked up a 3mm round and a seed bead. I'm going to pass back down through the seed bead. Actually, skipping the seed bead, pass down through only the round, and move on through the next seed bead in that herringbone. And I'm just working with this one little section, or this one little layer of herringbone here. So then I'm going to move on to the next bead in that herringbone. And I may want to pick up a different kind of bead. And I always want to pick up a seed bead at the end so that I have something to hold that bead on when I do the fringe. And I'm going to go back down through that bead, through the next bead in the herringbone, and through the next bead. And I'm going to continue in this fashion, adding beads that will add a nice little fringe around here. So you can add some large things, you can add some small things, you can add a variety of beads. I'm going to add here one of my rounds and a crystal, remembering to add a little seed bead at the end there to hold everything together. And I'm going to pass through the beads that I want to keep on there. So I'm going past the seed bead and going through the bicone and the little round that I'm adding, and through one bead and through two beads. So through the next two 11 seed beads in my herringbone. And as I do this, I'm just creating this really fun halo of beads. Keep it asymmetrical, keep it fun. Don't worry about it being too perfect. If you have a large bead like I have here, you may need to move over a little bit farther, maybe need a little bit more space for your bead. So I'll go down one more bead in my herringbone, pick this nice large crystal up, and then of course I want a seed bead down through the crystal, and then because this one may need a little bit more room next to it, I'll pass through 3 seed beads in my herringbone. And that will give him plenty of room on either side. It's kind of like planting flowers. You don't want to plant them too close together. You have to know which ones need a little bit more room next to them in order to give them some space. And I'm going to continue here, just adding on the beads that I think are going to be fun and just give me that whimsical look that I'm looking for. I'm going to continue around here, and again, I'm only adding beads. I'm only embellishing one line or one column of that herringbone. So I'm going to continue around here at this top edge, adding my beads, and when I'm close to done, I will show you how I'm going to finish that up. And if I want to add a little herringbone or a little loop at the top there. So now that I have the first sort of halo of embellishment here, I want to continue and I want to add more embellishment on the next row or the next layer here of that herringbone. So I'm going to take my thread and I'm just going to switch over to one of the seed beads directly next to where I'm marking, and I'm going to pass through that seed bead in the next row over of the herringbone. So I'm just moving down from one row down to the next. And I'm going to repeat the same steps. This time though, I'm going to make my embellishments a little bit longer because they are in the back, and so to see them in the front, you really need them to kind of come out a little bit farther from the embellishments that we made in the front. So I'm going to start here. I might pick up a couple seed beads here to already start getting me out a little bit farther towards the edge of the project where I want it to be. And then I'm going to pick up a bead. Oops, maybe this bead. Another seed bead again, just like I was doing before, and go back through my embellishment bead and the seed beads I picked up, and then of course following the same directions as I did last time, pass through the next 1, 2, or 3 beads in that herringbone, depending on how close together you want these embellishments to sit. So I got that one on there. And I'll keep going and do another one. And you can see, here's the one that I added in the back. And when I flip it, you will be able to see it there in the front. So we just want to make sure that they don't get lost in the back. We give them enough length there that they go ahead and show themselves on the front half as well. So I'm going to continue going around adding embellishments in this way and mixing them up a little bit so they don't have too much of the same embellishments next to each other. I want it to look sort of fun and random and see what sort of eclectic mix I can get going on here. So I'm going to continue with this and I will show you when I'm all done. To start the veil, I'm going to start on the back. At this point, you can see that I've finished the front, and on the back here, I've completed my second layer of embellishment. I've went ahead and tied off my extra thread, and I'm starting with a new piece of thread and needle. If I turn this over to the front, I just want to show you how wonderful this is, like all these different colors and finishes playing together. I have faceted crystals, I have the blue and the sea foam, and all of that is really playing off of the different colors and reflections inside of that 18mm cut Rivoli here. So it is cut here with all that beautiful reflection, and all of that reflection and color is mimicked by what I have on the outside here. So just a really nice way to add some depth and dimension to one color Rivoli. So again, here back on the back, I'm going to start here to make a little bezel, or to make a little bail to hang off of whichever piece of necklace or rope I want to have this guy hang from. So this is essentially going to be a pendant. And here I have a rope, a little twisted herringbone rope that he would look lovely on. So I'm going to make a bezel or a bail large enough to wrap around this twisted herringbone rope. If you don't have any idea what you're going to attach it to, you could simply just use a metal bail. You could just put a jump ring on there and then use that jump ring to then later attach to a different kind of bail that works for whatever necklace you'd like to hang it off of. But if you have something ready that you know you're going to use, like my herringbone rope here, then that is perfect because you know exactly how long or how wide and how big you need to make that bail. I'm going to start the bail on the back side. And I'm going to start here by just going through a couple seed beads here on the back side of the bail, the very inside ring of seed beads, and I'm going to go through just 2 of those seed beads. And don't pull your thread all the way through. Leave yourself just a little bit of a tail. I'm going to go back through those 2 seed beads again. And these will be my stop bead. 2 beads sort of acting like one stop bead. I'm going to pick up another 2 seed beads, and again back around through those seed beads, through the first 2 seed beads. So the seed beads that I'm adding will sit directly next to the seed beads that I passed through originally. I'm going to go up through those 2 seed beads. So I'm jumping up to the next row here and passing through those 2 seed beads that I just added, and making sure that I don't get the fringe caught in the way. That's a big risk with this project. You want to make sure that you're keeping the fringe, keeping your thread away from those fringes. And I'm not doing a very good job of it. Okay, there we go. And pull that tight. Now this is just a basic ladder stitch, and I'm going to continue with this basic ladder stitch until I get it to a point where it's long enough that it will go through, or it will go and fit around my necklace here. So I'm going to continue with this ladder stitch, and I'm going to keep working it until I get it to the length that I need to fit around the circumference here, the thickness of my rope. After working on the length of bail here for about an inch and a quarter, you can go ahead and test it out around whatever necklace you're going to hang it around. So you just want to make sure that when you wrap that bail back on itself, that it will easily accommodate whatever you're going to put through it without a lot of friction. You want the necklace to easily run through the bail, but you don't want the bail to be too big either. So once you've got it at about the right size, we can go ahead and finish this up. So we're going to take the very end of the bail here, the very end of the strip that we're working on, and just bring it back down, loop it around, and we're going to go through either the base of the bezel, or you can go through that first set of seed beads where you started making the bail. The important thing here is to line up the seed beads, the right and the left seed beads, so that you don't accidentally twist your bail as you work with it. And you're going to go through the pair of seed beads at the base, and then pair of seed beads at the very end of your bezel here. And pulling that tight. Once you get those 4 beads together, give it a nice tight pull, and then just reinforce this. So go through that again, through the beads at the base, and through the beads. Oops, and be careful that you're not getting stuck on any of your fringe. And then through the beads in your bail here, the beads that were the very last beads in your bail. And once that's nice and tight and you have that connected, you can go ahead and tie off your thread in whichever method you prefer. I like to take my thread here and just go through some of the beads in the base of the bezel. And once I know that it's in a space, it's in a spot where it's not going to be very visible, I will make a little knot here, just making a little knot around the thread that's already running through my beads here. And I'll go follow my thread here again through my beads, and as I pull that, it'll pull that little knot into the beads. And at this point I can burn down my extra thread with my thread burner. So then now that I have my bezel and my necklace, I can grab my necklace here And I can easily slide that onto, I can easily slide my bail onto my necklace. And here I am with my completed bezeled Rivoli. Hope you enjoyed making this bezel with me. If you want to be notified of other bezels or bracelets or earrings or necklaces or anything that we make here at Potomac Beads, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and turn on the notifications. That way you'll know as soon as we have a new video that you might like just as much as this one.